Today I'm going to talk about another game mechanic, one that's been increasingly popular lately. Choice. Choices are great, especially in games. It's the one thing that differentiates the medium from other things like movies or TV shows or Microsoft Excel. You're in control. You decide what happens, and you decide whether or not you want to spend hours picking flowers and shooting fireballs at small wildlife or beeline the main plot. If you die, it's your fault. Usually. I'm going to go into a bit of detail of the various ways in which choice can be used, and more importantly, misused as a game mechanic and how it can be done better. Most of the people watching this are probably familiar with Telltale games. If you haven't played one of their games, you've probably at least heard of one. The Walking Dead, The Wolf Among Us, Game of Thrones, Tales of Borderlands, Minecraft, Story Modes, Guardian of the Galaxy, and there are more being announced practically every week. There's something for everyone, and of the ones I've played, they were all great. There's only one problem though. Play enough of them and you start to see through the illusion. You notice what's happening behind the curtains, and it's all the same in every game. Though I have to admit, Game of Thrones, the last one I played and the most recent, was a lot better than The Walking Dead, their first game, which really took off. The idea of the games is this. You choose what the character you're playing as says and does, usually through dialogue options and occasionally through actions. When an important choice is made, a notification appears saying what happens. Sounds good, right? In theory, that would be an amazing game. But in reality, most of these choices barely have an effect, if at all. It might change some dialogue or change a minor interaction down the line, but will have essentially no effect. Then there are more important choices, and these are very obvious. Usually you have to choose between two characters you have to save or something along those lines. These are the choices that matter, right? Actually, it's surprisingly unimportant in the long run. Think of the game's structure as a triangle shape pointing down, kinda like an upside-down food pyramid almost. At the beginning, there's limitless potential. It can go anywhere, but you make choices and perhaps a person lives or dies. You move a level down the triangle, and whichever character you saved, they would have been written out of the story either way because they die or leave the party to go do whatever. It's an illusion of choice that eventually ends at the tip of the triangle, the one true ending. I never played Mass Effect except for a couple hours of the first game, but I remember the hype surrounding how you would be able to transfer your saves over each new sequel, and it would end in a climax where every choice mattered. Yeah, that didn't happen. Instead, everyone just got the same choice of 3 endings and nothing before that mattered. It was a huge controversy and caused them to almost apologize by releasing DLC and sparked a huge debate about whether it was okay to retroactively change the content to appease fans. It's not. If your creation stinks, it stinks forever. So why is this? What's the reason behind all these choices being offered, being shown off as the appeal, and then essentially being tossed to the side as the game progresses? Well, the answer is simple. Time and money. It's simply not worth it to create the results of the massive combination of possible choices when most of that content won't even be seen. If the current working model is a pointed down triangle, the ideal model is a tree root system. It starts from a solid base and grows almost infinitely in the amount of possible endings that can result from your choices. This is why a lot of games have a good evil mechanic. You usually only need to make 2 possibilities for each choice when it applies. The 2 best ways to handle choice, in my opinion, are first of all, to not acknowledge that it is a game mechanic. This new genre of, let's call them, cinematic adventure games, has a big tendency to start off with a show of how much your choices matter. This game is determined by the choices you make. The story is specifically made for you and you alone. Telltale games and David Cage games, what's his company called? Right, Quantic Dream. They do this a lot. Even though Cage has ironically said not to play his games more than once because you'll see the man behind the curtains. Yeah, he does tend to go off the rails and into the ocean a bit. Anyway, one of the few games in which this new genre that handled choices well was Until Dawn. Even though it had the most pretentious Your Choices Matter screen of all of them, Until Dawn was less obsessed with his choices, except during the psychologist scenes, which were more to determine what scared you and, without spoiling anything, were a retroactively brilliant plot twist. It focused more on the horror element in the action scenes and didn't show the effects of most of your choices until almost the very end. There were literal cliffhangers that depended on choices you made in the first scenes. where Telltale has very clear choose which character you want to live moments, Until Dawn has some similar moments that aren't always as obvious, are more dramatic, and consequences aren't necessarily immediate. It was also more of a game. You spent less time watching and more time playing, hitting buttons, walking around, solving problems, investigating the environment. Not that it was the only game of those I mentioned that did that, but it was the only one that gave you the feeling that you were progressing at your own pace and not checking conversations and examines off a list. It had the same problem of getting the same singular ending, but because of the way the story is told, you don't really care as much. The ending is about who survived, and that's what your choices determine. In a way, it's almost the opposite of The Walking Dead. Instead of an upside-down pyramid, it's more of a square with nearly identical endings at the bottom. So, what's the second good way to handle choices? As fun as it sounds for every choice to matter and culminate down the line in an epic, completely unique conclusion, that's really asking too much. Either the game would be too short or too boring, or most likely, too obviously procedurally generated Mad Libs. There's just not the time, the budget, or honestly, the effort for it. Think back to those choose-your-own-adventure books. That's the kind of story you realistically would get with the tree root system. Fun when you're 7, but not great. So, the second way to handle choices, don't make them matter much. I mentioned good and evil mechanics earlier. While it allows you to roleplay a bit, hence its popularity in role-playing games, it also allows you for other mechanics, like Knights of the Old Republic's Jedi-Sith power system. The powers you wanted to have in combat at higher levels required you to make the relevant choices in conversation and out of combat. Be diplomatic and help people, and you can get healing powers. Use intimidation or force the people that you just saved to pay you, and you can use lightning. It provides a tangible gameplay benefit for role-playing your character and making the dialogue choices mean something instead of just doing whatever happens to be the most convenient at the time. It doesn't take much effort compared to the earlier examples, but it gives a purpose for your choices. And every level of game design is involved, from art and writing to programming and mechanical design. Every major game lately feels like one of its big marketing draws is choice, or grappling hooks. Really, every game in 2016 and 2017 has grappling hooks in it. But, much like grappling hooks, choice mechanics are ultimately a tool. And sometimes you don't need a measuring tape, you need a screwdriver. Not every game has to be the ultimate choose your destiny, get your special ending game that everyone is trying to unsuccessfully make. One of my favorite series is the Zero Escape series. It's a trilogy of decreasingly visual novel and increasingly Telltale-style puzzle games that are mostly story-based. I'm going to focus on the final one, Zero Time Dilemma, because it's the newest and I have the PC version to get footage from, but it is also the closest to a Telltale game in terms of style and the furthest in execution. Most of the choices you make are either right or wrong, and it's immediately obvious, but you can go back to any point in the story and redo it, making different decisions. Even though you are constantly making choices, the choices aren't particularly important or something to dwell over. If you don't like it, you can roll it back, and for the most part it's a linear game that's about piecing together what's going on in the story. You can actually beat the game in the first scene by winning at a coin flip. The game ends and you're free to leave, but the story ends. You don't get to know what happened at all. And that's what really this is all about, trying to tell a story in the best way possible. Sometimes having a million choices is a hindrance more than an exciting, cool new thing. If you play enough Telltale games, you can tell what's going to happen next. If you play Heavy Rain more than once, especially if you played badly one of those times, you can see the man behind the curtains. If choice systems just get in the way, it's probably better not to have them, as cool as they are. Linearity might be boring, but it's also the best way to tell a story, unless you break the fourth wall a bit and use the medium. The fact that there are things that can only be done in a game is part of your story, something that the Zero Escape series did very well. But unless you can plan the story around the mechanic, just like unnecessary upgrade paths or an awkward combat system, it only serves to get in the way. And this is one that, even though I usually enjoy the results, it's a bubble waiting to burst. What are your thoughts about choice mechanics? Can you think of any better ways to pull it off? Got any wonderfully terrible examples of games that couldn't pull it off? Leave something in the comments, and if you want to, go ahead and like and subscribe. I'll see you around.